out of in front of the camera. Okay. Oh well, that's not your problem. You get to see the big screen. The students may be getting these double ones in the online folks. So let's take a look. We're still introducing the course itself. So there's our title, and we are going to start at regular starting time. I need to change that. We're not switching to 1:30. We went through the syllabus last time and the schedule. What we haven't done is assign who is in Group A, Group B, and Group C. And looking around at the order that you all came in today, I'm guessing you're not roommates with anyone else. So, is there anyone that is, in which case I can make sure you're in the same group? Then we can do it by how you're sitting. I can do it by the alphabet, because it's the next 3 weeks that we will meet at the mouth of Red Butte Canyon. So, anyone have a preference of who's in your group? Otherwise, I could just sit here. It looks like we've got 12. Yeah. 8. So what if we go 5? You're Connor?
Yes.
Nolan, Mac, Corey, Jared? Yep. Okay. And you can be Group A, and we will meet on next Monday. And we will meet at the mouth of Red Butte Canyon. Do all you all know where that is? Does anyone not know? Let me ask it in that way. Mac, do you know where it is? There's a red, what my kids call it the French fry sculpture. It's the entrance to the concerts at Red Butte. Okay, and then just drive up that little dirt road to the gate and park. Corey, Jared, do you know where that is? Okay. So, Connor, Nolan, Mac, Lori, Jared, our Group A so far. So let's go Landon, Riley, Ashley, Tanner. And your Group B, sound all right? Which leaves the 4 over here. So Gavin, Lexi, Scott, and Bertha. Okay. So everyone's clear that if you're not, A's meet with me next week there, B's the following week, C's the following week. And I will by then have online lessons that you can do just sometime during those 3 weeks.
I'm pretty sure this coming Monday's Labor Day.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. So thank you very much. Postpone a week. I just knew that today was the last day I was going to meet with you over this, so that, great, thank you, Berkeley. It's those following 3 weeks. Okay. We'll get a little more introduction into the final project also. And Gavin, this last week, the first 23 minutes that my cameras caught are posted online. After that, it was mostly a review of 3500, which you took. And then also online are, under the README page for last week, it has links to the 3500 class. So, and then I'm using YouTube because you can speed up YouTube. So you can listen fast, which is great. Okay. Now we are ready to get going with the rest of the class. And we actually began this last time because we did get through limits of acceptable change and standards and indicators. So we will be able to move through a number of things fairly quickly. What we're aiming for in recreational ecology and management is that we be able to recognize, measure, put out prescriptions for desired future conditions. Desired future conditions is a technical term. It sounds like a common term, but it's one that you will hear the rest of your life if you go into resource management. Okay, the kinds of things that we're looking for. This is bank erosion in South Carolina. You don't have to go far. There are plenty of places here in the Wasatch where there are a lot of trails that need to be realigned. If any of you have hiked from Silver Lake up to Twin Lakes lately, that used to be an old mining road, and now there are a million trails. And the main old mining road was too steep, and it's all full of loose rock, which is why nobody wants to walk in it. And also Willow Heights, so across Big Cottonwood Canyon, there are places where that trail is entrenched to my waist. And you should see little kids, they just fall down, and they're made of rubber, so it doesn't matter so much. But adults do hurt themselves in there. We don't fall as nicely. Okay, traffic congestion. Yellowstone is the most famous for this, but it's everywhere. It's up Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then trail erosion. You should not be seeing roots. That's not normal here. These should be covered in dirt. Okay, so looking at current events, how many of you were here last winter, skied or tried to get up the canyons? Or reverse, if you live out that way and you tried to come to campus, it could have taken 3 hours to go the opposite direction of the ski flow. So that's less of an environmental and more of a social issue, but it's all about recreation. And so we are going to include transportation fairly frequently in our classes. So locally, how many of you have heard of the Central Wasatch Commission? One. Okay, one is willing to nod. So the Central Wasatch Commission is this odd little thing called it out of the state allows for an interlocal agreement. And so it's for the most part, not entirely, mayors from across the valley. There are a few other people in there also. Which is interesting because some people say, oh no, another layer of government, but I have a hard time seeing it as another layer. Instead, it's trying to get the governments that are there to cooperate. So they, by themselves, have far more authority in their individual mayor and commission positions than they do collectively, other than this gets them together at least once a month to work on problems in the Central Wasatch. I think I have to turn this PowerPoint off rather than hot link or it doesn't show up. So, let's give this video a try. And think about it in terms of recreation rather than in terms of cows.
Concern among biologists and social scientists alike. I've never referred to this as the problem of open access resources. In short, the tragedy that commonly occurs because each user receives direct benefit of using the resource, but only there's a fraction of the cost that is associated. So examples of that, it could be African elephants that are near extinction. It could be Amazon rainforest deforestation. It could be overfishing of many of the fisheries worldwide. It could be overfishing in a pond, say, right here. The idea behind this has been around for many years, but Garrett Hardin's 1968 piece in Science was the first to bring this to the forefront about the time that the environmental movement began planning its first Earth Day. In Garrett Hardin's example, he presents us with an open access pasture. Anyone who wants it can bring their cattle to graze. Each rancher's goal is to maximize his or her private benefit. Every rancher has the incentive to bring more and more cattle to the pasture because they receive the direct benefit of grazing their cattle there. Unfortunately, they only bear a fraction of the cost of the overexploited pasture. So they're going to continue to add cow after cow until the pasture is overgrazed and destroyed and no longer usable as pasture. In other words, their individual incentive invites overall ruin. For even though if they recognize that the pasture is being exploited, somebody else will bring a cow if they don't. And so they'll continue to do so. It's not that they don't know the asset's being exploited, it's that if they wait and try to delay, it'll just be exploited by somebody else. The large issue here is there's a lack of excludability. The rangers have no way of stopping others from adding cattle to the pastures. In his piece, Garrett Hardin suggests two main ways to go about solving the tragedy of commons. The first is through privatization or private ownership. The second is through public ownership or government ownership. So whenever we have public ownership, one of the benefits is that we still all share collective rights in this asset. This is one of the reasons why we have the national park system, to protect natural open space at Yosemite and the beauty of Yellowstone, things of that nature. But one of the problems with public ownership is that decision makers don't bear the cost of their actions, nor do they receive additional value from every good decision they make. For instance, imagine if you're a park ranger and you find some innovative way to reduce large forest fires that adds value to the park itself. You don't receive the direct benefit of your decision. You and your staff are not going to receive large pay raises or are not going to receive the large stream of value that comes from that decision. However, private ownership does solve this problem. With private ownership, the decision maker bears the direct cost of their actions. And so, for any poor decision, they're going to bear the cost of. But any positive, innovative decision, they'll receive the benefits. So if you were a ranger or a park owner who found this innovative way to solve the problem with forest fires, then you would receive the stream of value from that good decision. There's not a silver bullet to the problem of open access resources. There's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. But we do know that limiting access and ensuring that decision makers bear the cost of their actions allows us to address key concerns with open access resource problems.
So we looked at this mainly with cows. And this presentation that you just saw only mentions strongly that private ownership is one of the solutions, because then people are going to take care of their own place. Garrett Hardin's conclusion is actually not private ownership. He discusses private ownership and he says, yeah, in a lot of places that works. But one of the other, and the one that he recommends on what's already public now, is that instead we have some kind of mutually agreed upon coercion, is his term, but that instead we agree to follow rules and regulations. One of our big, and he does mention, one of our big open resources are our national parks, our national forests, and Bureau of Land Management. And for the most part, we accept the rules that are defined about those. So in our national parks, they are handled differently than our national forests. National parks are much more restrictive, and we generally accept that. So national forests, where you can go four-wheeling, drive an ATV, and same with Bureau of Land Management land. They all have travel plans, so even those have restrictions. Where national parks, they're just not accepted. So that is Garrett Hardin's solution most of the time, is that instead we regulate each other. We agree to a set of standards and then we follow them. So keep both of those in mind, because what if somebody else owns Zion National Park or Arches National Park, if that was privately owned? Would you get to go there? It would be expensive. So there's always a trade-off here. Okay, what are some other common pool resources besides national parks? What's being illustrated here? Nolan?
Greenhouse gases.
All of our gases, so our atmosphere. We share in it, right? Is it possible to privately own the air? In some cultures, it's not possible to privately own the land either. But our culture, we do own the land, or we hold it in common. But the air is a little harder to hang on to. Do we exploit the air ever? Are we using it in the sense of, in our concerns, it's usually about what we dump into it, not so much that we use it, but what we dump into it. So you don't need to answer. How many of you polluted on your way to class today? You don't have to answer, but thank you. But getting to class has gotten awkward, right? A little bit strange. So you have contributed a little bit. And we're contributing now. Cooling this room has a cost. And you can see that picture of the inversion of Salt Lake, a very mild version of it up there. Okay, fisheries. Commercial fishing of your nature probably isn't out fishing anything. You're catching your fish one at a time. But there's certainly plenty of other kinds of fishing. And then there's competition, which I'll bring up in a minute, in Yellowstone. And then this is, I don't know where that picture's from. I'm not sure if that's a national park or a national forest. But there are many places that, especially in this country, we do hold them in common. A big chunk of the West in particular is forest or Bureau of Land Management land. And if it's not national parks, if it's Bureau of Land Management or Forest Service, there are oil and gas leases on it, there's mining on them. So that's the individual using collectively owned resources. Okay, this is the one I meant to bring to you. So Yellowstone. Yellowstone Lake used to have the only trout in Yellowstone Lake used to be the cutthroat trout, the Yellowstone cutthroat trout. And then some 2 decades ago, maybe 3 by now, a couple of lake trout got into the lake. Nobody knows for sure how or why. Lake trout grow a lot bigger. And 2 of the lakes, they're not native to the West, they're Great Lakes fish. They're not native to the West, and they do grow a lot bigger. And so did a fisherman drop a few in? Or there are 2 lakes where they have been stopped. Lewis Lake, which connects to Shoshone Lake, so that's a one body. And then Hart Lake, if I remember right also. So in the big fires of '88 in Yellowstone, I know it's ancient history to you, it's very real to me. They were helicoptering buckets of water out of those 2 lakes and dumping them on the hillsides around Yellowstone Lake. So there's a chance they got brought in that way too. They got scooped up in one of the lakes where they had been planted and maybe dumped into here. But our population was decimated by over 95% in Yellowstone Lake. And cutthroat lay their eggs up in the streams, up in the side streams off of Yellowstone Lake, particularly up in the thoroughfare area. And that's where the grizzly bears get their spring, cutthroats are spring breeders, early summer. And so the grizzly bears would concentrate up in those streams to where it was supporting hundreds of grizzly bears the first half of the summer. But when the population dropped off by 95%, lake trout drop their eggs in the lake. They don't go up the streams like salmon, but cutthroat do. So the grizzly bear population was also dropping tremendously. They had the freedom to move though, so they just stopped coming there, but they were moving into other places and getting more crowded and causing more problems, and they were getting killed by people, by rangers, because they were running out of food and having to eat, getting into campgrounds and such. That was a common resource. It wasn't because it was overfished, it's because somehow people had dropped lake trout into Yellowstone. Okay. So those are the original idea from Garrett Hardin was about resources. But what about experiences? Do you think we can make parallels and move it over and say, there is a common pool of resources, it's only so big. Can we overdo it? And part of my hits is that I brought up trying to get up the Cottonwood Canyons and go skiing. So can we overdo experiences? Has it been happening this summer in the Cottonwoods? So you even heard about it in Massachusetts. Okay, so what do we do? Do we need to privatize the highway, make it a toll road up the Cottonwoods? Or do we need to find some other limit, some other way to limit it? Any suggestions? It's been in the news a lot. Berkeley, what have you heard about trying?
I feel like I've heard people talk about trying to build like a track sort of thing going up the Cottonwoods.
Up Little Cottonwood, there is a serious possibility, physically possible, it's actually been done before, to run a train up to Alta. So a train is a possibility. Originally they were talking about running it up the old mining track, which was on the south side of the stream, the creek. But more recently they're saying they would like to do the study, to run it parallel to the highway, just on the uphill side of the highway, and run it all the way up. Big Cottonwood is so much windier, it probably won't work there. And so their solution is to then mine a tunnel between the two canyons and then connect it over to Park City. So that would be one way to reduce congestion by having a more efficient delivery system. But what are the costs of putting a train in there?
Well, if they're mining a tunnel, I feel like that's a huge disruption to like wildlife and areas.
It's a mine. So earthworms and who else are down there? I want you to keep thinking. I kind of teased you a little bit there. But keep thinking, because disruption to the wildlife will be relatively minor compared to some other things. So keep thinking it through, Landon.
I know in Little Cottonwood there's some controversy over it because they might have to blow up some boulders in order to build it. So within the climbing community, pretty controversial.
And more than boulders, what else are we going to have to do to be able to run a train alongside the highway? Riley, thank you.
It's going to impact like the water.
And indirectly, how's it going to, tell me the indirect.
Just like, I know things aren't perfect, and like oil leak into the stream.
Okay. Let's go back to Cody.
You're going to have to fence off the railroad in some way to keep people and animals from getting on there to avoid crossing more destruction vehicles, but I think the train will not.
Okay. They will have to have some kind of separation. But wildlife has to get through that corridor. The deer have to go up and down that slope. The goats, the bighorn sheep, have to go up and down that slope. What, Ashley, what else?
With plant removal, due to bank erosion.
I'm not quite hearing you.
Plant removal for the
Devegetation. More than just that, and that will take us back to who, right behind you, Riley, saying it's going to affect the water.
Well, does that lead to like bank erosion and going into the water?
The creek is almost always a few hundred feet away. Not true in Big Cottonwood, which is why Big Cottonwood's even harder to solve. Little Cottonwood, there really is room, but what would we have to do to fit a railroad next to the highway? Doesn't the highway already fill the entire space that they have leveled So they're going to have to dig another at least 20 feet into that hillside. And that's where we're going to have problems with water, because that's going to mean a 9-mile-long, gigantic dirt removal. So then it gets into the water, and once it gets into the water, then it can start having effects on the banks and other things that you brought up. Nolan?
They also have to build some kind of avalanche barrier, because I know that trains have been taken out by those before, so.
Yes, and the proposal up there, we're getting into too many details, but I think it's fun, is to do avalanche sheds that would cover both the highway and the train. Because, yeah, you don't want to have an avalanche take out your train. It's bad enough to take out cars. Connor, is this?
They put them in this year. They put in a bunch of avalanche, up in the middle of like avalanche sheds.
They've actually put in sheds?
Yeah, this past season. And then the proposal is actually a gondola going up the.
Yes.
They just finished the EPA environmental impact statement.
No, they just finished the draft of the draft.
Um,
And we're going to learn about that if you're in 5410. I know some of you are. So, yeah, it's really funny. They just released the draft of the draft, which I've never heard of before, but I think it's great. I don't like their solutions, but I'm glad they did it this way. So, yes, a gondola is another part of their study. It's not proposed. It's proposed to study.
well, don't they have 3 proposals so far? It's the bus
Yes.
lane only, the extend the
Yes.
highway, and then the gondola.
Yeah. And the CWC, who is partly responsible, is proposing the train alongside the highway. Everybody agrees the original train plan is probably not a good one to put it down by the creek, but to instead run it parallel to the highway. So, which is a far better place. The digging they have to do there, hopefully they can catch all of the soil. And yeah, so, but yes, who was the rock climber that said it's going to disrupt down there at the bottom, some of the boulders? So, anyway, how great that you already know a fair bit about this, because what we're talking about is, here's a common resource, Forest Service land up Little Cottonwood Canyon, with a commercial interest at the top and a recreational interest throughout. One of the problems with the gondola is it would service only the resorts. You would not be able to stop and go hiking anywhere. One of the advantages of the train parallel to the highway is the proposal would be for a whistle stop. You could just pull the chain and they'll let you out anywhere. So anyway, that's in the works. It's going to happen in your lifetime if you're going to remain a Utah and a Salt Lake County person. And we can think of it in these terms of the commons. What is this helping us, or is this making it worse? Are we adding more cows by doing this, or are we doing something to the field to make it more productive? So those are the kinds of things that this class is going to be about all the way through. So, okay. Just looking at that picture on the left, have you ever had to wait for a climb? Okay, yeah. Know your guidebook. Know all the routes anywhere near there, in case you want to switch. Okay. I think we hit this reasonably well, and we will keep hitting it throughout the semester in our discussion about Little Cottonwood Canyon. So. Now, thinking back to 3500, do you remember hearing about environmental, social, and managerial? Those are the settings that we talked about in there. It just helps us simplify in our decision making. We need to consider the environmental impacts, social impacts, and the managerial setting. So, Forest Service, BLM, they're all very different from each other. So, Cody, there's still some, oh, you're not leaving? Okay. Afraid you're, okay. So here are among our choices. You're going to be hearing these, so we're introducing them today, but you're going to be hearing about them a fair bit. We can alter the environmental conditions. So using technology, by adding a train, by adding a gondola, by adding an extra lane just for buses in the winter and just for bicycles in the summer. We can do management strategies. What if we charge, in addition to the $90 to $140 you pay to go skiing, unless you got an Epic Pass, what about a toll for the road? A number of years ago, 10 or so, the Utah legislature, for the very first time, is allowing tolls on certain public roads, with Little Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood was their main objective. So they could do that. They could do permitting by money. So if you want to pay, you can go up. We could limit the number of people that go up there. But we have to agree upon these things. So that's the mutually agreed upon coercion, is looking at all of those. All right, so let's look at impacts themselves. So what we looked at right there is a little bit of management. Now let's look at the resources that we have impacts on. So we've been talking about Little Cottonwood and saying, oh, it's going to impact the wildlife, it's going to impact the vegetation. Somebody else said it's going to impact the water, it's going to impact the soil. Those are the big categories that we will be talking about in this class, and you already brought them up. And we talked about the experience, the impacts on experiences. At what point do you stop going? Do you feel like the new people have displaced you? That you are not going to go climbing in Little Cottonwood anymore or skiing in Little Cottonwood anymore because of the impacts on your experience. Facilities. At what point do the ski resorts get too full? And right now, Alpha and Snowbird in particular have put in so many large volume chairs that the lines are really short. When I was younger skiing 30 years ago, lines at Alpha were regularly 45 minutes. I haven't skied there since then. Is that still the case? Still 45-minute lines standard on the weekends at Alpha? I know you're all snowboarders and you don't go to Alpha. No? Okay, I don't know what the weight line is. Impacts, certainly, last summer, it didn't happen this summer that I've heard of yet. Last summer, so many people used the outhouse at Cardiff on the 4th of July weekend that the water coming down to flush with wasn't flowing fast enough, and the toilets all backed up because people were flushing so quickly. And people didn't stop going to the bathroom in the toilets and behind the toilets and beside the toilets because that was the only place they could hide. So yeah, we were harming facilities with just too many people. So toilets are among the things that the Central Wasatch Commission studies carefully, and there are something like 16 toilets up Big Cottonwood, and the estimate is they need 64. So, yes, there's a lot of poop all over Big Cottonwood. Okay. Across the top there, those are our 4 categories that we're going to be spending an awful lot of time, at least the first half of the course. So we're going to be looking at soil, vegetation, wildlife, and water. Those are the main resources that we'll be talking about. We don't hit experiences as heavily in this class. We talk about it a lot more in 3500. And in both of your books for this 5420, they talk about direct and indirect effects on those 4. So soils are going to be, and I don't think we're talking about them in this order. The soils is the first that we'll be talking about. So when we come back, I've asked you all to bring a little bit of soil to class after our ABC field trips. Okay, soil compaction. How's that a problem? And where is it happening? So out in our national forest, it's easy to think about close. Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood, Mill Creek, Where is soil compaction a problem? Where do you see it?
On and around trails and then usually river water banks.
Okay. And what's the problem with soil compaction?
It completely leaves, or it makes the soil unable to support vegetation.
Okay. And do you know why? Does anyone know why it can no longer support vegetation? Landon?
Doesn't it like change the soil density, which makes it harder for water and air to circulate through?
Yeah, I don't need to teach the rest of the semester. At least the soil section. What he said is exactly right. It will change the density, because right now, most soil has air spaces, pore spaces, that water and air go in and out of. And we need that water and air to exchange because the roots need both. And so, once you crush the soil, you compact it, the water is likely to just run off and the air will never get into the pore spaces because they don't exist, they've been crushed. Which then makes it so so the vegetation doesn't grow. Okay. So, pretty direct. Indirect are the results. So reduced soil moisture, the rain just runs off, we have more flash flooding, which affects water down here. Reducing the pore space reduces water and air getting down to the roots. Okay, vegetation. Direct effects on vegetation. Where do you see this? The Cottonwood Canyons, the Uintas, canyon canyons.
Definitely campsites.
Okay, so backcountry campsites, campgrounds, but those we consider just sacrificed. We've just kind of given up on those, that we often put out cement or asphalt or gravel. So yeah, the trails, when people go wandering off and create multiple trails to get out of the mud, again, we're devegetating and we're compacting the soil. They go together very often. Wildlife's a little less obvious, right? Unless you've been in an area for a long time, back before it got crowded. Right? So, just none of us were here before we were here, right? So we don't know how many moose there were, how many deer, how many elk. Actually, we honestly do know how many moose there were in Utah 100 years ago. Does anyone know the answer to that trick question? Scott?
0, right?
0. They are a relatively recent migrant to Utah. So if you go back to the first diaries, even back not just the settlers, back to the fur trappers that were here, 0 mention of moose. So they have been migrating down from Canada through the Rockies, spread out into Colorado, over to us. And now we have a fairly big population in Big Cottonwood. In City Creek, we have a bunch of moose. So we do know that, which is interesting that that's a population that's expanded. And so many shrunk, like bison. Connor?
Is there any specific reason why they've spread to Utah so recently?
It's probably wolves, but I can't say 100%. There's still a fair bit of missing the word.
Would it be the reduction of wolf population?
Yeah, the reduction would be the guess. And I don't know why they have been keeping them up to the north. I don't know why they would have retreated, because this is not my field. It would be fascinating to find out that if they just followed the ice as the retreat at the end of the Pleistocene, did they just need to be in that colder environment? And then the addition of wolves, and then you get rid of just one thing. So the temperatures are still warm, but without the wolves, is that what's allowed them to come down? And anyone know more about moose history than I do? So it would be fascinating. I assume it's been studied, so I'm sure there's speculation out there you could look up. Okay, so, but yeah, wildlife could be a little bit harder because it just doesn't sit still for you. We honestly have no good idea how many mountain lions there are in the Wasatch or in Utah. They are so hard to count. And we're not that accurate on the number of bears that we have either. Okay. Water is a lot easier for us to observe and measure. It's already been mentioned by several of you several times already. So we've talked about concerns about exotic species being introduced like the lake trout. Did you know that in Utah, cutthroat trout are down to less than 5% of their original numbers? So, which lets you know how many trout there used to be. Because you can still catch cutthroat trout in an awful lot of places. But it really is down to around 5% of their best estimates of when Europeans first settled. Anyone remember last week we brought up water quality in Little Cottonwood Canyon? It was in the news last Monday morning before this class. What do you remember, Riley?
That the old nine is bringing down the minerals into the water.
Yeah, it's not too bad right now. It's still, but their concerns in that article at least were, what if one gets dammed for a while and then that dam suddenly bursts, which happened in Colorado not too long ago. So that was a huge polluting event. So the concern is, how do we make sure that doesn't happen here? So yes, but it's due to mining, which pretty much all mining ended in the Wasatch, this part of the Wasatch in the 80s. A little bit still goes on the Park City side, not a lot. Okay, pathogens. Oh, I read one this morning. What stream just got closed? They didn't totally close it. They have just, starting yesterday or today, have advised against going to an extremely popular place in Utah. Anyone catch that in this morning's news? The Zion Narrows. They're having an algal bloom in there, the blue-green algae, which is toxic. Somebody's dog hopped in and bit a big chunk of it because it can float in little rafts, and the dog died. So, what? You're not supposed to have off-leash dogs in the park, but somebody did, and they paid for it. So they're advising people to not walk up the Narrows. It doesn't go through your skin, but if you have cuts, you can have some nasty infections. So don't do it. The Colorado River now in the fall is green. It's a really weird blue-green. So that's another place I would go in the fall at low flows. Okay, temperature. We don't have Jack today. Who else is a fisher person in rivers? Okay, so here in the West, on really hot years, we have problems with the water temperature because as we're pulling off water for irrigation and for domestic use, there's less volume in the rivers, and so the sun penetrates more of it, and our water temperatures go up, and above about 70 degrees, trout can't pull the oxygen out of there's less oxygen in the water, and their gills have a hard time pulling it out. And by the time water hits 80 degrees, which is still cool to us, the trout are dead. They cannot pull the little amount of oxygen out of the water. So water temperature also matters because of the oxygen. So we've already been hinting about direct and indirect, so we can move fairly quickly through this. Direct effects on wildlife and indirect effects. So actually, I would call all of those direct. So harvesting, hunting, that's a direct effect. We could use it as a management tool because without wolves, as we mentioned, some of our deer populations are growing up to the point where they are starving. So we do have this balance between hunting and the deer, the elk. The top pictures are in Alaska, and that's Denali, the mountain in the background. And the only way into that part of the park is on these buses. And the main idea is that then people can't just jump out of their cars and follow the wildlife. You can see that even with buses, the habits of the wildlife get changed. All of our towns are built in wildlife habitat. So when I have deer in my yard all winter long, you probably do too. That's where you have to be way downtown to not have deer. But deer are on this campus all winter long because this is where they belong. So we've kind of taken over. Ski resort towns especially have really taken over habitat. So indirect effects there on population size. Our big feat. So this is out of your book, so we don't need to linger here. We can move on fairly quickly. So looking at direct effects and indirect effects, the direct ones are a lot more obvious. Indirect effects are not as obvious, but the main point I want to make is they all swing back together again. They change behaviors. They displace the wildlife so they're not everywhere. They change reproduction levels. And that means species composition and structure also changes. So we're going to have a different mix of wildlife than what there used to be. Yeah. Okay. How do you drive the highways? For some reason, Wyoming seems to be the worst. All summer long, it's like every 2 miles you smell skunk. There's one splattered. There's another one. There's another one. I got wondering about that. Why are there so many dead skunks on the road? There are plenty of dead squirrels. There are not too many dead coyotes, but skunks. Why are there so many dead skunks on the highway? Give it a shot, Ken.
I would say maybe their arms more, but just because they have such a noticeable indicator, you're not like, I don't smell squirrel.
Okay. They're more obvious is what you're saying.
Yeah, so you
Suggesting.
notice more.
Well, I got thinking about it, and that was one of my thoughts. And the other one was, how do skunks defend themselves? Do they run and hide? No. Their defense is to stick their butt in the air and let off a smell. Is a semi affected by that defensive mechanism? This is a total failure of a defensive mechanism in our world now. It was a great defensive mechanism if there are no cars. So this adaptation that worked so well for so long is quite a failure now. All right, so we hit all these: soil, vegetation, water, wildlife, air, and a few more that we haven't hit yet. So soundscapes. We didn't used to think that hard about protecting soundscapes. Have you been out in the backcountry, back in the wilderness area, and been really bummed because you could still hear traffic? You can hike 9 miles from the Mirror Lake Highway up onto Rocky Sea Pass and listen to the trucks grinding up over that pass. It's kind of disappointing. So soundscapes are something we want to think about. I'm going to skip those for now. Night skies have become more common to protect. There's a state park just last week got a night sky designation. It's fairly close to Salt Lake. It's really cool to find that a place that close to Salt Lake could qualify. Did anyone catch that in the news? So East Canyon Reservoir State Park. So you go up Emigration Canyon, you go over Little Mountain, you go up over Big Mountain, drop down onto the other side, and that's East Canyon before you get to Hannaford and Morgan, if you know those places. So that's isolated enough that the little bit of light coming from Hannaford, which would be the only almost line of sight town, isn't. And also Hannaford probably has 200 or 300 people. I don't know what population is there. But anyway, that was really cool that a state park that close could qualify. Brighton talks about it. I don't know that they'll ever get there, especially with night skiing. That looks like daylight up there with night skiing around. But that ends at 10 or 9 or whatever it is. Okay. I'm going to move through. Also out of your book, that first chapter, so we don't need to spend a lot of time here, but this is taking a little circle. I don't see that it feeds back into itself. Of a string of indirect effects. So the first thing is we walk through a place, so we're trampling it. And we scuff away the vegetation, the leaf droppings, which gets called litter, and we scuff that away. Why is that a problem? What's the value of having leaf litter sitting there on top? Old dead leaves, branches, landing.
It decomposes and becomes part of the soil.
Yes, so it decomposes. It becomes the food for the future roots. Canada. I saw your hand go.
Oh, no, he stole my decomposition. He stole my decomposition, though.
Still, I'm sorry, masks are awful.
He stole my thoughts on
Oh,
decomposition.
he stole your thoughts. Okay, yes. So you're both right. I give it to you. Connor, what do you think?
I was just gonna say it's a very nutrient-rich level of soil that provides a lot of food.
Okay. So you agree, all three of you. One more thing that it does, Gavin.
Like moisture?
Yes, it'll also help hold moisture longer after a rain. So they're all interrelated. Water is also a nutrient, so you can look at it that way. We just always pull it out. Okay, so just walking through, we scuff it off if enough people walk through. And this is why we create trails, is so that all of that scuffing gets put into just a few feet wide. And yep, we sacrifice trails. We know they're going to have nothing growing there, very poor nutrients, and the runoff is a problem on trails. We've already talked about the micropores, which means the air that roots need. They do need oxygen, they do need water, they need to be able to go back and forth. So we talked about reduction in water, reduction in air, increased runoff, which is going to get into the streams. So we're going to move those effects away from just that immediate spot of trampling, but any runoff that we have, which is increasing because we don't have anything to hold the water there, is going to increase soil erosion and is going to add silt to the streams. So, trampling is complicated. Okay, let's talk about experiences. So we're leaving that physical resource. We did talk about crowding at 3,500. Any of you have crowding experiences this summer? How's the harbor? Not bad?
I mean, it was pretty bad.
Okay.
Because also right near where we are, they have like boat rentals. So like we're on like 100-foot boats, and they're like cutting underneath our bow, like trying to kill themselves.
Okay, so probably new drivers too,
Yeah.
pilots. Okay. Everyone talked about crowding up the cottonwoods. Any of you try going to our national parks? Try going hiking up the cottonwoods? Ashley, what did you find? You were nodding.
Oh, just like both. Like I went to Yellowstone this summer and it was insane. And then,
You went to Yellowstone.
yeah.
Where did you have to alter your plans because of the crowding, or did you sit it out?
We were going to have to. Like we weren't going to be able to have enough time to be sitting in traffic and stuff. To see all the stuff we wanted to do, but it ended up with
So what did you end up cutting out some of your events?
like one or two, I think.
Okay. Because what's happening with the airlines? Yesterday's paper. What's the normal number of people flying out of the Salt Lake Airport in a day? It's like the size of a small town, 30,000 people. Do you know what it's down to right now? About 1,300. It's just, so yeah, where are they going instead of Europe? To our national parks. So, yeah, air travel is way, way down, but national park travel is way up. So we're having local crowding. Conflicts, you've mentioned one. The new pilots with a way too big of a boat that you wish was made out of rubber instead. So Yellowstone conflicts with just raw numbers. Okay. Anyone see a change in behavior? This has been in the news quite a bit around here and about the national park. What's one thing that the managers are seeing a lot more of besides people? In fact, two things come to mind. Riley, what are you thinking?
I know a lot of people had their cars broken into.
Okay, so burglary is up, auto burglary. Scott? Graffiti, I don't know, I haven't read anything about it being up, but it makes sense, just more people out there. And I'm thinking of two other things that are way up. Landon.
Littering?
Littering is way up. And more than just proportional to the number of people. Anyone dare speculate why you think there's proportionally more litter? What are you thinking, Riley?
I feel like more people that like don't necessarily go outside all the time are like venturing out.
Yeah, that's
Don't have the effort.
the people who would not normally go out there don't really know that there's no one to clean up after them. They might think it's like a city park where eventually somebody will clean up after them, but our national forests don't. So that would be an idea that we have a slightly different, less experienced population out there now. And I'm going to suggest that also in the past, people like us probably picked up other people's trash. And I'm much more reluctant right now to touch other people's trash, which is a little silly, but I'm still sticking with it. Where I used to haul trash out with me, I'm not. Connor.
I do the same. I do the same thing. I see trash, and I pick it up. But there's a lot of like PPE masks now that I see a lot of litter on, and I don't want to clean those up.
Yeah.
Personally, but
Yeah. Every parking lot has masks laying on the asphalt or the gravel. And the other thing that is way up this year in Utah are fires, wildfires, abandoned campfires. And I would say your idea that less experienced people are out there more. We're having about a normal fire year as far as acreage, but the number of fires is way, way up this year. The number of human-caused fires are way up. The number of natural fires is way down. We have not been having our afternoon thunderstorms that are so classic for our summers. Those Arizona monsoons are just not coming through Utah. A little bit down south and a little bit more east. So the number of natural fires is way down. The number of abandoned campsite fires are very far up, which is to some way good because those are closer to the road and they can get engines in there with water. So they've been putting out 300 or 400 fires this year that they were able to catch like under 5 acres and be able to get a truck in there. So the number of fires is way up, and especially the proportion that are human caused are way up. So depreciative behavior isn't just graffiti. It's a bunch of stuff, just stuff we do badly. I've already asked you, anyone else? What you've observed out there that's different this year, especially how fun that we're here looking at this accelerated season. Berkeley.
I spent a week, my last week of summer backpacking in the Sawtooth.
In the Sawtooth of Idaho.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat some of what you say because we're trying to record.
Oh, for sure. And I just was But I think with more people coming outside, maybe then that haven't really before,
Yeah.
there's less education about like how to bury your waste and packing out toilet paper and stuff. So
Yeah.
kind
So,
of
yeah, as Riley is saying, we have more inexperienced people. People who might have instead gone to a resort are now going out into nature and just don't have the knowledge, the experience. Should we go through this quickly? This is the social norm curve, the simplified version. It is in one of the videos. And I believe this short version is in your book. I've given you the more full one in the video from 3500. So what we're doing, let's just go quickly. Let's go ahead, just in case anyone's missed it. So across our x-axis are the number of groups encountered along a trail per day, and how acceptable is it? So this is a survey, and you're saying, is 0 okay? And almost everybody says yes, that's what we prefer. Bumping into 2 other groups, still pretty high acceptance. Like my kids used to wonder when I would take them hiking, Dad, why are we running into any people today? Is there something wrong with this trail? No, we're having a wilderness experience. They didn't get it. Okay, even bumping into 2 and 4, even 6 isn't too bad. By the time you bump into other 8 groups, there's a noticeable drop-off on the number of people who find that acceptable. And reasonably, most people are saying, yeah, by the time we bump into 10 parties, that's too many, and so on. So let's take a visual of this. Oh, sorry, we'll get to the visual. Looking at destruction of facilities, vandalism, graffiti, as Scott mentioned. Trails, we're having problems with trails, the more people walking on them. Because it's been such a dry year, I don't think we're getting as much multiple trailing as we do some years. So, okay. Campsites, people have talked about losing more vegetation. Tanner was pointing out that that's one of the spots. Oh boy, the parking areas up in Cottonwood. Forest Service has it in their plan, no new paving for parking, thinking that this is going to be how we're going to regulate the numbers of people. But instead, people park off the road, put their wheels in the dirt, drive over the vegetation. The erosion is so much worse because of the rule the Forest Service has. And they can't change the rule without going through a major process. So that process has begun. So that may change within 2 years. Okay, just thinking about facilities. This creature. This is something you should put in your notes. This is not in your book, but this is something that you will bump into. And this is the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act of, is it 05? There we go. Yes, it's 05. So, Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act. It's important to you because there's been a conflict running for a very long time now about whether it's legal or not to charge fees to go onto public land. Because the public already owns it, so can you charge a fee? National parks did not have an entrance fee in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. But just your general tax dollars were to cover everything. But tax dollars are getting spread wider and farther, and stuff targeted for natural resource, well over half of it now goes to fighting fires. So it's just not available like it used to be for recreation. So for a while, the Congress passed a law allowing for what they call the fee demonstration system. And the different agencies were allowed to select certain areas and charge fees, and we were just going to look at it and see if those areas that got to keep 80% of the money, if their maintenance load dropped. And sure enough, it worked really well. It works crazy well. When the local place gets to keep the money, it gets spent there. So you go down to the Pleasant Grove Ranger District, And you will find all of their facilities in far better shape than the Salt Lake Ranger District facilities, because they've had the fee demo system. The Mirror Lake Highway has also had the fee demo system, so there are more improvements up on the Mirror Lake Highway than there are in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons because of fee demo. So in 2005, Congress said, this is working, we can set it up wherever it makes sense. So that's something that people will occasionally hit you with and say, no, this is public land. I pay taxes. I should be able to use it. This is Congress saying, yeah, guess what? We aren't adequately funding with taxes. Too much of it especially has been drawn off into fighting fires. We need to get some of it back into the amenities that people use for recreation. So this is a big boost for recreation, having that pass. Has it been enacted in Utah? The Mirror Lake Highway is using it. The Pleasant Grove Ranger District is using it in place of what was the fee demo. It doesn't look any different other than they can change the fees a little more easily without having to go through Congress. But be aware, people will ask, and you can say, Congress has said that we can charge a fee on these places as long as that fee, 80%, sticks around and gets used. Because any use you do, even if it's just park your car and step out, pulling off the road creates some erosion, kills some plants. So there's always a cost, and Congress has said we can cover some of that cost by charging a fee. So this was about to be enacted in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon until the EIS got started. The Forest Service stopped doing this fee, the Recreation Enhancement Act fee, and just put it on hold and said, no, let's wait until this whole project gets solved more universally rather than just this fee, because odds are it's going to change. So, it had a starting date of July 2 years ago, and they cut it off. That's how far along their planning was. So it's around there. Expect to be quizzed on it if you work for these agencies, and you can say, yes, this is legit. Okay, I think we covered that. This is an interesting thing that's come out of the Central Wasatch Commission. Because these people are now talking to each other, the different mayors, the different commissioners, the public utilities, the Salt Lake Public Utilities has a person on there. They're now talking to each other. So the Forest Service ran out of money to clean all the toilets up in the Cottonwood Canyons, the few that are there. And Salt Lake City said, hey, we've got a little bit of money. We will send you some of our employees to clean the bathrooms twice a week. So how cool. A little bit of cooperation is helping out. Okay. Do you remember last year where we had the government shutdown? Was it last year or 2 years ago? So there weren't very many park rangers around, but the state governors and eventually our president said, oh, even without employees, you have to open the national parks. This is what it looks like. Because people didn't clean up after themselves. They just threw it close to the trash can. This is Red Rocks down in Nevada. Because people were not camping in the campground. They were camping out wherever they wanted. There just wasn't enough law enforcement. So, yes, sadly, we're finding out that people aren't, we really do need law enforcement. People are very willing to not do the best. Which is a problem, which is what Garrett Harding was talking about. That we have to agree upon the coercion. Those of us that are used to throwing our trash away or bringing it home, those of us that are used to only camping in the campgrounds in the national parks, don't really notice the difference, but it keeps being brought up. We've got a new population out there, a less experienced population. So, okay, and here we are. Here are back to our three concerns. What are the effects on the environment? What are the social effects? And what are the effects on the management? Gone through that. And this too, the idea that no matter what you do, if there's a use, if there's a visitor on the place, there is some kind of impact. So we just talked about this 3 minutes ago. Here you are seeing a visual of that same concept. The use is pretty interesting. The effects of the use are pretty interesting. This graph is very, very helpful. So across the Y on the bottom is time. Excuse me, that's the X. Up the Y is the amount of impact. So starting in the bottom left corner, there's no visitation, no impact. And look at that green line, how steeply that climbs with very little use. And then at some point, it starts to level off, although always climbing if you keep using an area, keep using a trail, keep putting tents up in the meadow. The idea is here that the initial few nights that a tent is set on vegetation, that's its greatest harm. The first time a hiker crosses a meadow, the first 20 people that create the first path, that's when the most harm is. If everybody sticks to that path, it eventually kind of levels off. If everybody sticks to the same backcountry campsites, there are areas the size of tents that get denuded, lose all their vegetation. But as long as people stick to those same spots, the effects start to level off. Now, if we stop using those places, which is this point, effective closure of the, effective closure of the campsites, we have two categories of recovery. And these will be topics throughout this semester. We will be talking about resilience and resistance. Okay. We're only talking about resilience on this one. Okay, on this picture. So low resilience environment means it's slow to recover. And then high resilience environment, especially environmental studies folks. Do you know any high resilience versus low resilience environments out in the wilds? What areas recover quickly? What areas recover very slowly? And it might be easier to think about vegetation. What kinds of vegetation recover quickly? What kinds of vegetation recover slowly? Connie?
Very dry, desert areas take a long
Okay.
time to recover, so they're very low resilient.
Yes, because they're already stressed. I mean, that's the best environment for them. Other plants can't survive there at all. But even they are pretty stressed. So many desert environments are really fragile. How about meadows? Wet, soggy meadows. What happens if you take a 4-wheel drive through a meadow once? A wet meadow. Riley.
I've heard that wildflowers are susceptible to damage, and that they take like a pretty long time to regenerate.
Yes, so let's leave the ATVs and just go to the vegetation itself. And why would wildflowers, and I'm going to let you have it, I'll give you a hint, contrast it to grass. So what's the difference between grass and a flower? Flowers are also called forbs, just for the biology people. Why do we plant them in our yards? And why do we put our flowers tucked away in the garden?
Grass is a more sturdy plant.
Yes, But why? Why? What about grass is more resistant and resilient than, Riley, than the wildflowers you were wondering
I
about?
was just gonna say the wildflowers need pollination.
Okay, so do grasses. So that by itself is not unique between them. Keep going. Keep thinking about the difference.
What times of year for the wildflowers are important?
Yes. What are you thinking, Ashley?
Their root systems.
Yes, tell me about their root system, because you've hit on the keyest part.
I think grasses are more like spread out, not as deep.
So grass roots, you're suggesting, are spread out,
They're like interconnected.
and they're interwoven. And there's just plain a lot more of them. So where's the biomass of a flower? Compared to a grass. Lexi, I haven't heard from you today. Where is the biomass of grass versus biomass of a wildflower?
Would it be in the roots of the grass?
Yes, it's in the roots of the grass.
Petals of the wildflower, and then, I don't know, anatomy of the wildflower.
Okay. So when you think about any flower and you go to, because you want it and you go to pull it up, you end up ripping out the roots more often than not. You really only want it to get the flower. Because they put very little biomass into their roots. Because most of them are annuals. They drop their seeds, they grow very quickly, and they die off. Grasses are almost always perennials, and they put a lot of biomass underground where it's protected. So you can kill the surface of grass, and it'll come back next year, or even in a week. As a little kid, we definitely killed the grass pretty regularly. And it would always come back because so much of its biomass is protected underground. Flowers, the biomass is up top. You step on a flower, a wildflower, you'll probably kill it. So, where that biomass is concentrated matters, and a lot of it has to do with being an annual versus a perennial. So, things to be thinking about. We'll be coming back to all of these. This today is a big introduction. We're hitting this huge shotgun of things we're going to be talking about through the semester and going into more details. But this is a graph that will come up fairly often, that those early, the early first trampling has the greatest effect. So how does that affect management? So not just plants. So if you know that as a manager, what does that say about how you're going to manage backcountry camping? Connor, what are you thinking?
I believe you always try and prevent it rather than clean it up or remediate it after the fact.
Okay.
So you're always thinking of preventative measures.
Okay, so we want to prevent especially anything new. So how do we do that? We encourage them to keep using the same spots. So rather than pioneering out into a new piece of the forest, we often will even put up signs that say camping here. Even in the wilderness areas, there will often be temporary signs that say campsites and an arrow to them. With the idea that, okay, we're already up here where the line is flattening out, so let's just keep everybody up there where the line's flattening out rather than having people pioneer new spots. So this is biology, but it also affects management. Taking a look at the biology. All right. So, how do we decide what facilities, activities, experiences, resources is appropriate at any given location? And that question itself is a little thicker, deeper than I want to go right now. So looking at what mechanism, what tool do we have that I had you look over that gets mentioned in the first chapter of both books? And then I made an extra video for it, not the limits of acceptable change video, but the other one. Recreation, thank you, Lexi. The recreation opportunity spectrum. And you might recall that that's where the experts have gotten together, pooled their knowledge, and gone around drawing polygons on the national forest, in the forest. We talked about it last time over zoning. And so a lot of these decisions we make way in advance. So then when somebody comes to you, that middle picture, and they say, I want to do a research study on this piece of the forest, you say, well, what kind of equipment do you need? What kind of impacts will you have? Then you look at the list that says, oh, I see that the equipment you need needs to be taken in by a truck, and this is a non-motorized area. Let's find you a motorized area. So some of those decisions are already made in advance. Those little live traps for mice, you can carry them by hand. They'll collapse flat. You can just fill backpacks full of them if you want to go trapping mice. Yeah, building structures probably is going to be in a eroded area. So a lot of those decisions are made in advance. So the recreation opportunity spectrum, which was new, 40 years ago, is really standard now. And it's really simplified those kinds of decisions. So those decisions are mostly made. Mission statements. This is where the Forest Service, Park Service, and BLM are all a little bit different. Forest Service and BLM are called multiple use agencies. They are going to allow more different uses. National parks, remember, we are to enjoy, but also to preserve and protect. So our mission statements, even way up at that level, and each national park has slightly different mission statements and objectives. And then this term, desired future condition, is one of those terms you're going to be using your whole life. Was this the one I mentioned earlier? You want to have this written down the rest of your life. Desired future condition, again, it's going to be a table full, a room full of experts sitting down and discussing what is our desired future condition? How crowded? What vegetation do we want to have there? Do we want what predators, what prey, and what numbers? What is our desired future condition? I've even helped on rainy, thunderstormy days when I worked for the Forest Service and I could not go out and do my field work without risk of getting electrocuted. I would get sent to the library and go through all of the archives of old pictures of the Wasatch. And we would try to figure out what was at that time our earliest photographs. What is the mix of aspen and conifers? Do we desire that, or is that a ridiculous goal to aim for? So you'd have to look at it and say, well, yeah, around the ski resorts, we've agreed that we're going to have permanent clear cuts. So those areas aren't going to be the same, but maybe some of the other wilderness areas, we are going to try to get back to that original condition. So again, it's going to be an interdisciplinary team trying to work out desired future conditions. Limits of acceptable change, we talked about a little bit last time, so I'm going to skip this slide. And I think this is recreation opportunity spectrum stuff. Again, if you don't remember it or didn't have 3500, there's now a video up that you can see that. I'm looking for something, I'm going to jump ahead to this. Okay. Just to give you one last thing, this is simple, that's why I want to end with it. I had that norms graph of how many parties in the backcountry were okay. We saw that 2, 4, even 6 was okay. By 8 and 10, nobody agreed. So instead, this is a national monument or park, I've forgotten which. Cumberland Gap, anyone been there? Cumberland, not Gap, Cumberland something. Okay. Is this an acceptable condition? You have to take a ferry boat to get to this national monument or park. It's all about this old place. I think it's a plantation. What do you think? You would like that? Get to go wander around? national park, so are you okay with 7 other people there? They came on the ferry with you. Is that going to bother you? Kind of expected a national park building ruin. How's that? This is how studies are often done. They will just Photoshop people into a picture and run them past the people they're surveying. 14, does that still look okay? Maybe. Well, I hit that button twice. That's okay. 35. Starting to get crowded. Even for a lawn, 35, Jared thinks that's pretty crowded. Well, there's the Zion arrows. This is not Photoshopped. This is what the Zion arrows look like right now. It's a bit of a greener look. Is that your idea of a good hike? Zion chooses to use this as a sacrifice area, and they say, yep, this is one of the places we're going to have really crowded. The next day I had a permit for the subway, for hiking the subway. We saw 2 other people all day in the subway. We saw a couple others up on a high trail. So one of the themes of recreation is to provide a diversity of recreation opportunities. So heavily permit in one canyon, the Zion subway, no permit, free for all in the Zion narrows. So recreation opportunity spectrum defines some of that for you. Okay, I think we can call it a day. Any questions about today? Any questions about 2 weeks from now especially? The A group will meet me at the gate at the mouth of Red Butte Canyon. And then the B group the next week, the C group the next week, and there will be 2 lessons by then up. One's on forest fire management. Lexi.
So can we just meet when class would start normally?
I'm not hearing you, sorry.
Would we just meet at Red Butte Canyon when class just starts normally?
Yes, we'll meet there at the same time. Thank you for asking. Yeah. And then the other 2 weeks, you're just an online person. Connor.
We're going to be there for roughly 120 minutes, like normal class time.
Yeah, I hope we can keep it. There's a chance it might go 2 hours, but it's also the kind of thing that I will go through the mechanisms, and after that, it's your chance to practice. So if you do have a commitment, you'll be free to go.
Okay.
So yeah, I will go through a trail assessment, an area assessment, hand you forms. You will go out and either go home or run through the forms in case you run into questions I'm around. Okay? Enjoy Labor Day. It will be crowded wherever you go. Yeah, there was an article in the Sierra magazine that said, I did something wild today. I stayed home. Corey, you take that off.
The online discussion has been closed since last night at midnight.
Okay.
So I wasn't able to get that done
Okay.
before class. So just if you could reopen that, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Will do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks, Kurt.
Good to see people. I don't know how much longer we're going to get to keep meeting.
Thank you, Kurt.
Bye now.